Right, let's get started. Right, Alan, what do you know about Joan of Arc?
She was burnt.
Nice.
That's the limit of my.
Hang on. Right, now this is a good one. And so, now that's your limit, right? What else do we know about Joan of Arc? Dennis,
Well, all sorts of things, I suppose.
just give it to us.
Well, she was a martyr, I suppose.
That's good.
And she was the only woman ever allowed to stand behind the altar rails.
That's a nice one. Nice one. This man knows. Right, anything else?
Well, I kind of know the story of her now because I had such a Catholic upbringing.
Well, you would, wouldn't you? Anything else that we know about Joan of Arc? All this stuff seems to be correct for once, because everyone else I've asked about Joan of Arc, they got it completely wrong. So anything else we know about Joan of Arc?
Well, she solved the dauphin that he would become king of France and that she would lead his men to victory.
Which king it was? Something the seventh?
Louis.
No, Charles. Charles. Right, come on.
Actually, she went back on a horse.
My God, you're doing so well. I want. What's that?
They had visions and they reckoned it was
Yeah.
hysterical.
Yeah, that's good. You guys are really learning. Talking about learning, Lillian. Lynn. Lillian's the name of a prostitute I used to know. Right, Lynn.
Yes.
No, you're not the prostitute, you're Lynn. Right, Karen.
No, I don't know anything more.
Right,
There's a lovely statue in the marketplace where she was burnt to death now.
Ah, no, a Chinon. Right, so, no, it wasn't actually Chinon. Chinon was where she went to visit the king. But so the statue is a famous place in France, beginning with an R.
Rouen.
Correct.
There was a conspiracy by the English to get rid of it, I think. I can't remember.
It was all about the English, and do you know what? The best bit about this today is the trial of Joan of Arc. Forget the archaeology. Let's do the trial, right? I'm going to give you one clue, right? I sometimes change my clothes. That's how she was. That was the final charge, and it was made to stick. And she wasn't burnt at the stake for witchcraft. She was burnt at the stake for cross-dressing. Okay, everyone's gone quiet now. Right. Oh, okay. I wear men's clothes occasionally. Christine Keeler. Right. And they were more practical to stop her being raped in prison. So yes. Oh, there you go. There's a strange man again. He's an awfully strange man. Right, so what I would like to do is by looking at... it's happened again. Every time Lynn's in the room, it goes to pot. No, it doesn't actually go to pot at all, because it worked out perfectly okay. Right, now, what we're going to do...
Sniffed out.
Hang on, I do all this here today, okay? Thank you very much. So what I'd like to do is give a few. We're going to do that in the background. You're all starting to wonder who's sniffing what, right? You can sniff whatever you like. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. So for a few bits of information, right? Was Arc her proper surname? The answer is yes. Jean d'Arc. That was a real surname. D'Arc. There's big arguments over this, but she wasn't named after a place in France called Arc. That was a proper surname. D'Arc. Mobiles off, please. The Maid of Orleans. She was born in the year 1412, and she was deceased on the 30th of May, 1431. We are not going to go down the avenue that Joan of Arc survived. There is talk that she did, but and actually the person who was actually burnt at the stake was an imposter, who gave up her life for Joan. But we won't go into that. Anyway, she was captured on the 31st of May, 1430. She was held in a prison. She made many prison breakout attempts, and on the 30th of May 1431 she was burnt at the stake. So key facts. She is a heroine of France. Now, it may be ludicrous to say that many years ago I used to think, because of that silly film that came out in 1999 that claimed that it was under Charles VII's wishes that she be placed on trial. That wasn't actually the case. She was actually captured by the English and the Burgundians, the damnable Burgundians, She was placed on trial, and the French tried to rescue her, and it didn't have any effect. One other key fact, a few more key facts. The Maid of Orleans, she's called the Maid of Orleans because she tried to she tried to lift the siege of Orleans and save all the French army there, and she actually succeeded. No, that's something else. It's part of the 100 Years' War. There was actually not, it was actually a little bit more than 100 years, but you know, these things in history. She was canonized as a Catholic saint, and she was a Catholic. And her dad was known as Jacques d'Arc, D-A-R-C. So she was actually Joan of Arc, and her mother was Isabella. They were a peasant family from Rome in France. So what we need to do to actually get an idea where we're actually going with this, before Ellen actually says anything, can we see a map? Right, and what we're going to do, straight away, we're going to have a look at the map. What's that? Do you know, actually, I had an English lesson, a French lesson on Monday, and it is Domremy, by a French person, but I've got Huon, not Rouen, and Reine rather than Reims.
Or Rouen is somewhere different.
Yes, you are correct. However, I have just ballsed things up. Hang on a minute. I have ballsed things up so much because you were talking. Right, I need to. I did show you a map there, and it's now gone. So what I'm going to have to do, I have to get on the internet. Kathy, it's your fault. You're talking then. I got her to talk. It's a bit of a distraction. Well, whilst I'm waiting for that, right? Oh, and we've got internet connection. So there we go. It's worked again. What it was there was Lynn, right? And in magic, it worked. Thanks, Lynn. Makes a change. Right, so can you see this map? Hopefully you can. No, I don't want to enlarge. You're going to have to do with that one, right? Chris, don't worry about it. You have to get new glasses. Right, so the idea, Domremy over here, it's on sort of border of the Holy Roman Empire, and this is the sort of landscape of France at the time we're talking about, from 1415 onwards. What happened in 1415? October? Agincourt, correct. 1415 was the Battle of Agincourt. There it is, Agincourt. And the problem is, the thing is, what I'm finding in history is that history definitely is written by the victors. Or those that seem to write things a lot quicker than everybody else. And in fact, at the Battle of Patay is around the same time that we're talking about, where Joan of Arc lifts the siege of Orleans. At the Battle of Patay, the English army was completely annihilated. Thank you very much. But we're not told about that. We're always told of the Battle of Agincourt. And what happens at the Battle of Agincourt is King Henry, who was the Prince of Wales at the time after the defeat of Owen-Glendour, went on to be the absolute great victor of Agincourt. But then again, the French a few years later, the Battle of Patay, completely annihilated the English army. Could I actually jump something in there straight away, right? And this is very relevant. We all know about the Spanish Armada, don't we? 1588? Has anyone ever heard of the English Armada? Anyone in the room ever heard of the English Armada? The English Armada that was completely annihilated by the Spanish a year later. The same amount of losses of ships. Francis Drake was brought back to the court of Queen Elizabeth. Nobody's ever heard of the English Armada, have they? Because nobody ever writes about it. But the English army was the English army, 15,000 soldiers to invade Spain, completely annihilated by the Spanish, and so was the English Navy, and nobody ever celebrates that. This is the problem with history. History seems to be always written by the victors, always seems to be written by white people from England. And this is the same case with Agincourt. It's almost as if everything after Agincourt has been swept under the carpet. But within 15 years, the map of France was the borders were rewritten, redrawn, and King Charles VII started to dominate France again. So, and it was all thanks to Joan of Arc. So we're talking about Dom Remy. She heads with 2 knightly individuals through enemy territory, all the way over to Chinon, to the court of Charles VII, and she says to Charles VII, "I've had a vision," because she'd been playing in the woods all by herself, and a few things happened to her. She saw a few saints, and she brought this vision to the king. And it may sound absolute nuts that a king takes the opinion of a 17-year-old girl, and basically the king is convinced that Joan of Arc should lead the army towards Orleans, and it was very successful. And why did he do that? Because the French had tried everything else. From the Battle of Agincourt, they'd gone from defeat to defeat to defeat to defeat to defeat. So the only thing left is to try a woman at the head of the army. And do you know what? It worked. Various different descriptions of it. But what we need to do, one of you did say fact or fiction. How can we do any archaeology associated with Joan of Arc? And that's exactly where we're going to go today. But where we're going to go at this moment, we're going to go with a bit of fake archaeology. One of those wonderful niceties of the past. So if I could bring, let me put that over there. Thank you. Well done, Lynn. Your spell casting's working today. Lynn, you can come again.
Don't think I want to.
Oh. Jane, Jane.
Got him over the barrel.
Exactly. Right. So here we go. Oh no, I pay extra. I pay Lynn extra for her services. Right. So this here. This little glass test tube type thing with a stopper on it, with a seal on it, that was believed to be the Turin shroud or associated with Joan of Arc. Inside, it's thought that those were some of her limbs, maybe a bit of an ulnar or something like that. But the fact of the matter is, there was skin on it and flesh, and it was sealed within this sort of glass test tube type thing. And that's the scale. And nobody dared to look inside what this was, because this is Joan of Arc. This is what's left of Joan of Arc. Now, what did the headlines say? The headlines actually said, come on Lynn, there you go, how St. Joan was sniffed out. So obviously, when you take the top off this, right, what is the odour you would smell, Dennis? Oh, come on, Dennis, be a bit quick. The body was burnt.
Oh, well, ashes, smoke smell.
Yeah, bit of that stuff, yeah. Well, actually, that wasn't the case. So it's 2007. This is a bit of practical archaeology using your nose. So these were thought to be relics of this wonderful saint, Saint Joan of Arc. And usually when they write articles about Joan of Arc, they always say she was burnt alive due to heresy and witchcraft. That's a complete fake bit of news. She was never, ever prosecuted for witchcraft. And in fact, well, that goes into the end, so we'll do a bit about that then. It turned out that the contents there weren't from Joan of Arc at all. They actually found out to be scraps of wood and the remains of a small cat. Okay? Hang on! You may laugh, lady.
Don't. My cat's going through it at the moment. I'm not filled with jest.
My cat's going through. Anyway, so discovered by a student in an attic in Paris Pharmacy, in 1867. And immediately, this student thought, these were the remains of Joan of Arc. And they ended up going to Chinon, which is the place of Charles VII court and all the rest of it, and where the vision was brought before the king himself. This was authenticated by the church in 1876. So there you go. It had to be real. And it goes on to say playing an important part in the wonderful victory and all the rest of it. But the tests on the relic took around a year to complete and were led by a certain Philippe Chalier, and this was in 2007. A forensic scientist, and it goes on to say that this lots of tests have been made associated with people from that time, and history and forensic science are crossing paths more and more frequently. Forensics now give us the scientific means to perform autopsies on the past. As for the relics of St. Joan of Arc, our tests give conclusive proof that these aren't her remains.
Well, she could have turned herself into a cat when she's a witch.
Hang on, you two shut up about your cap thing, because this cap thing's important. That's really important. This cap thing is really important. Don't worry, Alan, I'm making up for the other week that you didn't turn up to the pub.
I was ill.
Oh, it could have been worse. You could have been Goff going to the meal a week later. Right, anyway, as well as using carbon dating and infrared analysis, Chalier employed an unusual technique of sniffing, a technique known as olfaction, or basically, as lifts up the lid, in a blind test. They got two French perfumeries in to whiff the samples. And as they whiffed the samples, they were surprised to find that they didn't find the whiff of burnt wood, or decomposed bones, or skin. The odours were pleasant. The smells weren't all horrible. Very strange. And it turned out some were pleasant and fragrant smells from this test tube. Very interesting. The predominant scent was vanilla, indicating that the relics came from a body that had decomposed naturally. The organic compound vanilla is produced during this process, whatever process this is. Joan of Arc, as we know, was set alight at the stake. So Joan's body should have smelt sort of carbony. And sniffing is rarely used in the field of paleopathology, but in this case it was. In doing some more science, obviously it could still be the remains of Joan of Arc. Maybe they scented it. Did you see a play on words there, Dennis? You saw it. Carbon-14 analysis dated what they thought may have been a human rib, or it could have been anything, really, any small bone, contained in the relics to be between 700 and 300 years BC. So whatever these things were, was pre-Joan of Arc. But then somebody said, hang on a minute, right? Is this really something that could be that old? And then suddenly somebody said, actually, the rib bones, it's not actually the remains of a rib of a human at all. It's the remains of a cat. And then somebody jumped in there and said, hang on a minute. If it's the remains of the cat, it proves it's associated with Joan of Arc. Hang on a minute, how can that be the case? Well, what they did, they got a cat which was mummified from years earlier, and they chucked it into the fire, right, as Joan of Arc was being burnt. Because this is really interesting. Because black cats were traditionally thrown on the fires that burned those accused of witchcraft in medieval times. DNA tests revealed, however, that the animal was of non-European origin. So in other words, this was more than a fake. St. Joan of Arc languished in margins of history. And she very much became the Orleans of legend, the Joan of legend, Joan of Orleans. And she, after the time of the Revolution, the likes of Napoleon said, look, we got Joan of Arc, a woman. She was very victorious over our enemies, and, we can use her to help us in his campaigns. However, the help was, when we look about how we came by these, it looks like these remains had been placed into a glass jar when Napoleon's soldiers had been on tour in Egypt. And they were brought back and placed in the attic, right, with a little bit of a seal on them to say these are authentic. But nobody said that these are authentic remains of something from Egypt. If they had done that, then they would never have been known as the remains of Joan of Arc. Some people did think they were very genuine, and some people still believe they're very genuine, right? But science and sniffing has won out, Dennis.
Yep.
There you go, a nice bit of sniffing there. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to a bit more information, right? Oh, and I've actually, strangely enough, how have I got Joan of Arc's signature in front of me? But then again, I do. This is what I think. What this is the positive vibes that Lynn brings to my classes. See, thank you, Lynn. Straight on there. I didn't even know that's her signature apparently, right? When I say apparently, Joan of Arc was illiterate, and this leads us in. This that was a given name. Jehanne. But obviously she was known as Joan. Now the one thing is, well, is
in France she was Jeanne. Joan at all.
yeah, exactly. So she's known as Joan. Yeah.
Jean.
Well, Jean is a male French name, but then again, we're not going to argue over this. The fact of the matter is, however this is pronounced, Lynn, we're going to make sure we keep this positive. However this is pronounced, right? She was illiterate, so this on actually the documents agreeing to herself being burnt at the stake, right? Looks like it was fate. She had no solicitor, she had no representation, and she couldn't read any of the documents that she was signing with a cross, and then eventually it was changed. There you go. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually read a little bit more about Joan of Arc, right? And then we're going to get straight down. Hang on, we want you over there. Go on, off the screen. Oh, it's back again. You know, I've always got to thank Lynn for her positive vibes. So her campaign of reconquest of France lasted a very short period of time. And on the 31st of May, she was handed over to the English. 23rd of May, she was captured on 1430 by the Burgundians, who then, as I say, eventually handed her over to the English. So she's a very popular figure in the history of France. So the background, we've got to do a little bit of a background about this. The 100 Years' War began in 1337, so it had been a war that had been going on for a very, very long time. It was over a long inheritance dispute over the French throne that involved English factions, Burgundian factions, Holy Roman Empire factions, and all the rest of it. And with all this flowing, at this point in the 1300s, the territory of the English in France had been growing bit by bit, to actually get to a height on the 25th of October in the year 1415 at the Battle of Agincourt. Correct. The Battle of Agincourt. This dramatic victory at the Battle of Agincourt, subsequently capturing the whole of northern France, including, if we can, well, if we put my map up there a minute, just sort of, if we open this a minute. Okay. Oh, this is working so well today. I'm so impressed. Right. So in other words, Battle of Agincourt. So in other words, overnight, the whole swathe of northern France fell over to the English, and also around Bordeaux as well. So when you look at the map, and these are the Burgundians who were allies with the English anyway, they fought with the English continually. And when you sort of look at this map and you squint your eye, more or less half of France is under the control of everybody other than the French. It's a little bit less than half of France, but you know where I'm going with this. And this was all over a short period of time. And by the reign of Henry VIII, bit by bit, bits of French territory were lost. And the only thing left under the reign of Henry VIII was this little port known as Calais. So, you know, you can tell where we're going with this. The English had this massive victory, and bit by bit their territory is lost. In other words, this is Brexit in reverse, but we don't talk about that. So there was a great calamity, and the great calamity was that the wonderful city of Rouen fell into English hands. The city of Reims fell into English hands, and the city of Paris fell into English hands. And guess the only major city of France, forget about Bordeaux, nobody's really interested in that. The only major city of France that was still really under French control was Orleans. And it's said, if Orleans was captured in that fateful year, in 1428, if Orleans had been captured by the English, this would probably still be under English control, the whole of France. But that's something else altogether. So there's all these wonderful shenanigans going on, and what we need to think about is a little bit about her life. But what I want to do is try to really stay away from a historical narrative. We know she was from this little village over here of Domremy, which is basically on the border area. And when we think about her life, from a very early age, probably about the age of 13, I'm told, I was reading this years ago, that apparently girls of 12 and 13 get visions and start to be interested in Wicca and witchcraft and all these different types of things. I was reading that years ago. Strangely enough, she was around 13 herself when she went into the woods, into her father's garden, into the woods, and she had visions of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret. And she was told that she should one day visit the Dauphin of France, who at Rennes, to convince him that he should kick out the English. But unfortunately, by the time she got of age, by the time she got to 17, the king was now at Chinon, because the French had lost all his territory. And it's said that when she visited the king, it's said that she said, "I must be at the king's side. There will be no help if not from me. Although I would rather have remained spinning wool at my mother's side, yet must I go and must I do this thing, for my Lord wills that I do so." And with all this, she steps into history. Now, there are two bits of archaeology that we are going to do still to make sure that this stays in the ilk of archaeology. So at Chinon, as she enters the court of now to be King Charles eventually, in 1429, at the age of 17, this is what's said. After years of one humiliating defeat after another, both the military and civil leadership of France were demoralised and discredited when the Dauphin, Prince Charles, granted Joan's urgent request to be equipped for war and placed at the head of his very own army. His decision must have been based on a large part on the knowledge that every orthodox, every meaningful attempt, every rational option had been tried and had failed. So when only a regime in the final straits of desperation would pay any heed to an illiterate farm girl who claimed that the voice of God was instructing her to take charge of her country's army and lead it to victory. And she was also a woman. Fact of the matter is, to take any notice of a woman as a king then was unthought of. But he took that chance, and it was a chance that led to a great victory of the French over the English. So on the 29th of April it was, 1429. So when you think about Joan of Arc, this is 1429, April 29th. Within a year, just over a year, right? Within a year, that campaign of Joan of Arc was over. She had been captured and handed over from the Burgundians to the English. and then a year of a trial that lasted a whole year. It's a very short period that she's on the stage of history. But really, lots of people on the stage of history are on the stage of history for a very short time. Akhenaten being one. Adolf Hitler being another. They're on the stage for a very short period of time. Joan of Arc's play on the stage was basically 2 years. 1 year of that was a trial. So she was seen. She was seen to be leading the army. She was seen to be wearing armour. And in her trial, she was accused of wearing men's armour, which was in a way was a bit of heresy, really. And every witness in court said that what else could she have worn going into battle? And also, she didn't wear a helmet. So by not wearing a helmet, she was not seen to be completely disguised as a man. So that charge was dropped. So this is all building up, isn't it? So the military campaign, she arrived at the besieged city of Orleans, 29th of April, 1429. And with all this, there were various different campaigns. The English went in full retreat. They retreated from Orleans. This was amazing. And into another bit of the story, which we're going to do in a short while, comes the ring. Does anyone know about the ring of Joan? No? The ring of Joan. Now this is really important. The ring of Joan. A Joan was placed up for auction. A ring of Joan was placed up for auction not so many years ago, and it was sold in an English auction. It went over to France, and then somebody in government said, it's 2016, somebody in government said, oh, actually, we didn't give an export license for this ring, and since then we've been asking for the ring back, even though it belonged to Joan. So the quirkiness of history. But that ring itself was a gold-plated ring, and it's likely at some stage in 1429 it was given to her by her parents. So the question is, how could poor parents own rings and wealth? They become ennobled. They become part of the noble stock of France by Charles VII. They were actually nobility. So now you think about an illiterate girl. By the time the girl was placed on trial, she was now nobility. She was the nobility of France, which completely paints a whole different picture. This was not an old crone who lived down the street, who was 17 years old, 18 years old, and placed on trial. And slowly but slowly, I'm not going into all the history here, but slowly but slowly, the Battle of Patay, there we go, on the 18th of June, some say Joan of Arc was there, some others don't, but the English army was completely annihilated. It was one of the most important defeats by the French over the English in history. So whenever you see quotes like, can anyone name a victory that the French have ever had over the English? Right? Ligny, Quatre Bras, and Patay. And lots of battles in the American War of Independence as well. So the French could be seen to be very, very victorious. And about this time in 1428, they go from victory after victory. On the 16th of July, 1429, is no longer a Dauphin, okay? City after city in northern France falls, okay? Rennes falls. Rouen is still under English control, but city by city falls. And on the 16th of July in the cathedral, 1429, the Dauphin, the prince, now becomes the king of all France. On the 8th of September, Paris, Joan of Arc is injured in battle. She's injured twice in battle. So those that think that Joan of Arc was just a figurehead can be thought to be wrong, because a crossbow bolt went through her leg. If anyone knows anything about crossbows and bows, you need to be at fairly close quarters for a crossbow bolt to be able to have that sort of to be able to go through your leg in the first place. So she must have been very close to the front line. She was actually in the trenches around Paris. And so all these different things go into the history, and then what we need to do is go into the capture of Joan of Arc. But what I'd like to do is, before we go into the capture of Joan of Arc, let's do some key facts. Some nice, interesting key facts. And then we'll do Joan of Arc being burnt at the stake. Do you think of all the female roles I've ever played, Gillian, do you think I'd make a good Joan of Arc?
Possibly.
Okay, I'll start shaving my hair next week.
Definitely burning on the stake, huh?
Yeah.
So who
Crossbow
actually
through your head.
arrested her?
It was the Burgundians on the 23rd of May.
But if she saved France,
No, the Burgundians were sided with the English. They
the rest
basically
of France basically just let her go and be burned.
Basically, she was captured at Rennes. Okay, no, that's Rennes. I'm trying to get this right. She was captured at Rouen by the Burgundians on 23rd of May. She went to Rouen to try and capture Rouen for the king, right? But unfortunately, it was captured by the Burgundians because their army just ran away, and Joan of Arc was stood there thinking, "Shit, my army's gone." Right, and she was captured with a few other bodyguards. They were all slaughtered, and she was there. They stripped her of her armour, and there was this woman, and they thought, right, this is Joan of Arc. So within the English over-governors of this part of France, over the Burgundians, said, "We want Joan of Arc." This is exactly what happened. And then eventually she was put on trial. Basically, the French made many attempts to try and capture her, to try and get her back, to try and rescue her from the castle. It's said, in a little bit of a story, that she tied her bed sheets together and tried to get out a tower a number of times. Other times she jumped out the tower, ended up in the moat, getting stuck, asking for help to get back out again. All these different stories. But she never managed to free herself. And the French army never managed to rescue her. To be honest with you, she was the figurehead. And there's one thing about this, Andrea, right? At times, people pretended to be Joan of Arc. This is the strange thing of history. People pretended to be Joan of Arc, and they thought, oh, hang on, Joan of Arc's escaped. Oh, forget about her then. So another Joan of Arc led the armies, right? Unknown that Joan of Arc was still in prison. It's one of those weird things of history. That would make another good film. Oh God, I'm knackered now. Right, anyway, let's do 7 key facts about Joan of Arc. Right, Jeanne d'Arc, that's her real name, but d'Arc is actually the family name. It could be known as Tark, but it's d'Arc. Domrey. So before it. She was placed on trial in 1431. She'd been in prison for 6 months before she was actually placed on trial. And she was referred to in many different ways, Joan the Maid, because they didn't accept that she was nobility. She couldn't be accepted as being nobility. If she was accepted as being nobility, right, she could not be burnt at the stake. So they had to demean her in court. This was an ecclesiastical court that was run by the English king. Who run roughshod over ecclesiastical law. Under ecclesiastical law has to be the same across Europe, right? But it was English ecclesiastical law, which wasn't the same as French ecclesiastical law. Under French ecclesiastical law, one, she couldn't be burnt at the stake. English ecclesiastical law, she could. Secondly, if she was found guilty under French ecclesiastical law, she was to be incarcerated for the rest of her days, being looked after by a female bodyguard of nuns, which Goth would love. So that's a few other things, right? Number 2, doctors diagnosed from modern times from the descriptions of Joan of Arc. She'd been diagnosed with disorders ranging from epilepsy to schizophrenia. But actually, in a little bit of archaeology towards the end, she may have had something else, right? And then something else is that she may have contracted bovine tuberculosis, which produces seizures, dementia, and visions. Around the age of 12, 13, Joan of Arc apparently began hearing voices and experiencing visions. And I know from experience, my ex-wife, her dad had schizophrenia, and it's said that you usually diagnose with having schizophrenia about 12, 13. So this would make sense. So 12, 13, she goes into woods, and she has all these has all these visions. During a trial, she testifies that angels and saints first told her merely to attend church and live piously. Eventually, they began instructing her to deliver up France from the invading English and establish Charles VII as the rightful crown king of France. The maid asserted that a bright light often accompanied the visions and that she heard the voices more distinctly when bells sounded. Based on these details, some experts have suggested that Joan suffered from one of numerous neurological and psychiatric conditions that trigger hallucinations and delusions, including migraines, bipolar disorder and brain lesions, to name just a few. It would be unfair for me to ask if anyone's got schizophrenia in the room, which I'm not going to do. But if anyone's had any form of illness that they would like to talk about, have you ever had any delusions?
My dad had them.
Oh, go on, that is interesting. Go for it.
He had Parkinson's disease, and in late stage, sometimes they get delusions. And
What were these like?
well, so he was utterly convinced. If he could see, he thought he could see things in the room,
Yeah.
and he was utterly convinced they were there.
Go on, give us some
So,
examples.
for example, he used to phone me up in the early hours of the morning and say his room was flooding,
Yeah.
and everybody was in his room trying to escape the flood, and they were all standing on shelves, and he was utterly convinced. Another time, he thought that he got bombs attached to him, and he ran out in the home he was in, naked, into the corridor, saying, "Keep away, I'm going to explode."
Oh, this was now in the home. He was actually in
He
the
was
home.
actually in a
Yeah.
home back then.
Yeah.
And my daughter-in-law's, one of my daughter-in-law's young relatives has just been diagnosed with bipolar, and she has had similar things, similar visions. They are really, but they are utterly convinced that what they can see is real.
I can respect that. So I've got to say, it's a family thing, is it? Or no?
Which one? My father's?
No, your did you say
My
daughter?
daughter-in-law's.
Oh, so it's a
family.
different family, right? Yeah. So does it run in their family or?
Actually, her father.
Oh,
yes.
right.
Yeah.
Now that when we go towards the end, the archaeologists have managed to get a tiny strand of her hair from a seal. Okay, she used to get scribes within a short period on this planet. With that 1 year, she was noble. She managed to dictate to scribes, and she had a seal. And in one of the wax seals, there's a tiny strand of hair sticking out, and they're hopefully going to see if bipolar or what schizophrenia actually runs in the family from that DNA. So that they haven't actually got that yet. So while thank you for that, Jane. While commander of the French army, Joan of Arc didn't participate in active combat. Can we say that? Can we not? To have a woman, now you're gonna link with Boudica now, right? To have a woman heading an army against the English knowing all about Boudica and all these wonderful things, and maybe they did or they didn't. It would be quite frightening to have as an opponent a woman. It would be frightening, and she could be seen. She could be seen with a Joan of Arc bob. It's said that she never actually killed anyone in battle, but she was wounded twice. That's the other thing of this. So apparently she would accompany the men as a kind of inspirational mascot, brandishing her banner in place of a weapon. However, this is interesting here, right? Very interesting. She's known to have been responsible for military strategies, directing troops, proposing diplomatic solutions against the English, deciding how a battle should go, right? Surely we can call her a soldier, because did the Duke of Wellington actually lead the armies on the front line at Waterloo? Did he lead the armies at Salamanca in Spain? The answer is he was never on the front line, but he was still one of the greatest soldiers that England ever produced. So I think we can offer that to Joan of Arc. Whether she was in the front line or not, all those generals in the First World War, none of them went to the front line, right? But they were still classed as brilliant generals. No, they weren't. But do you know what I mean? They were still brilliant generals, and they were soldiers. So whether she was in the front line or not, you know, she was still a soldier, I believe. Now this is interesting. The red hair bit. There's various different descriptions of her hair, right? In the film, I've seen her hair is blonde at one point, isn't it? Was it just black? Yeah, because when she's... Do you see the scene where she's being dragged and her hair's much lighter? You see that one? Anyway, we'll talk about this now. Joan of Arc had a famously volatile temper. As I've experienced from Michelle, that's usually the volatile temper of somebody with red hair. Once placed in control of the French army, the teenage peasant didn't hesitate to chew out prestigious knights for swearing, behaving indecently, skipping mass, or dismissing her battle plans. She was the one in charge. And do I ever disagree with Michelle? No. She even accused her noble patrons of spinelessness in their dealings with the English. According to witnesses at a retrial, Joan once tried to slap a Scottish soldier. Did I say retrial? Yeah, she was placed on trial 30 years later. And every single witness in that backed up everything that she said. Nobody went against her in that trial. And then at that point, she was made a saint. But that's another bit of the story. Apparently, Joan once tried to slap a Scottish soldier. The Scots teamed up with France during the 100 Years' War. And this French soldier had stolen a piece of meat, so she decided to slap him across the face. You imagine a Scotsman, my God, a woman's just slapped me. Couldn't do anything. She also supposedly drove away the mistresses and prostitutes who travelled with her army at sword point, hitting one or two in the process, which probably would have made her very unpopular. But she's the one in charge. She's the one who wears trousers. And personal attacks by the English, who called her rude names and jokes, that she should return home to her cows, reportedly made Joan's blood boil. The maid's short fuse is evident in transcripts of her court hearings, when a clergyman with a thick regional accent asked what language her voices spoke. For instance, she retorted that they spoke French far better than he did. So, three other points here. Contrary to popular belief, Joan of Arc wasn't burnt at the stake for witchcraft. After falling into enemy hands in 1430, 31st of May, Joan of Arc was tried in the English stronghold of Rouen. And there were 70 charges against her, ranging from sorcery, debauchery, witchcraft, horse theft, you name it, it was there. I'm sure that's a lot of charges. By May 1431, weeks before she was burnt at the stake, that had been whittled down to 12 accusations. Only 12 accusations. They couldn't get anything to stick. She was illiterate, as thick as a doorpost, but she couldn't have... Nobody could get anything to stick on her. Obviously, she was highly intelligent in the first place. Most of these allegations, right, related to a wearing of men's clothes and claims that God had directly contacted her. Offered life imprisonment in exchange for an admission of guilt, Joan signed a document confessing her alleged sins and promising to change her ways. The mark that she put on her paper agreed to her being burnt at the stake because she couldn't read the document. That was the final document. But days before that, she was placed into a prison cell, and her clothes were really manky. She was placed into a prison cell. They couldn't get any of these allegations to stick, because the allegations that she wore men's clothing were based on the fact that she wore armour. That was dismissed. There was one person who was in the witness stand who actually said, I did see Joan of Arc wearing men's clothing, but that was the only one that could stick. She needed 2 allegations that she wore men's clothing to be burnt at the stake. They could only get 1. The judges all sat down, right, and they said, right, how can we get her? We've got to end this trial in a few days. She's going to be ending up in a prison, right? Eventually, she'll be handed over to the French, and that'll be history, right? How can we get her? And somebody came up with the idea that she needs to change into male attire. She needs to change into new attire for the final court date, the final hearing, right? So as she went into the prison cell, there was only one set of clothing there, and it was men's clothing. And then, shouting through the bars, right, a man threatened to rape her. So in the panic, she took all the female clothing off. She wore the men's clothing, which could all be done up with ties and all the rest of it, big boots and all the rest of it, completely. And then one of the judges wandered in, and the judge said, on that very act, you dressing up as a man, you've sentenced yourself to death. It was all fixed. And then the court document that she signed to agree that she was going to be burnt at the stake and all the rest of it. And she also said to the judge, I needed to wear men's clothing to protect myself against rape. And the judge said, why do you need to dress in men's clothing? Because God told me to do so. Bingo, we've got you. So interesting enough, fact number 6. 1434 to 1440, Joan's brothers passed an impostor off as their sister, claiming she had escaped execution. One of several women imposed as Joan in the years after her death, a certain Claudette resembled the well-known heretic and had supposedly participated in military campaigns while dressed in men's clothing. She and 2 of Joan's brothers, Jean and Pierre, you couldn't make this up, crafted a scheme in which Claudette presented herself to the people of Orleans, pretending to have fled her captors and married a knight, living for a few years in obscurity. The trio received lavish gifts and travelled from one festive reception to the next, until Claudette finally admitted to Charles VII that in fact she was not Joan at all. Despite their involvement in the deception, Jean and Pierre played key roles in successfully petitioning Pope Calixtus III for Joan's retrial. And in the 1450s, she became a saint. And before we have a break, how many of you have ever had a bob haircut? Jane, have you?
Definitely.
Lynn?
Yeah.
Okay, Kathy definitely. Joan of Arc inspired the ever-popular bob haircut, and we'll do everything else after the break, which originated in Paris in 1909. It didn't originate in Paris at all because it's based on the style of Joan of Arc. The voices that commanded the teenager Joan to don men's clothing and expel the English from France also told her to crop her long hair. Go away.
Mobile phones off.
She wore it in the page boy style, common among knights of her era, until guards shaved her head shortly before her execution. In 1909, the Polish-born hairdresser Monsieur Antoine, one of Paris's most sought-after stylists, began cutting his fashionable clients' tresses in a short bob, citing Joan of Arc as his inspiration. The look really caught on in the 1920s, popularised by silent film stars and embraced by the flapper set. While women continue to request bob cuts to this day, the dyeing of hair red has been completely unfashionable.
Oh, it's not.
So, what I'm going to ask, if there's any questions, let's have them now. If not, I need to run to the car and get the tea bags. Is there no more questions?
No.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, let it go ring, because the king gave it to her.
It was specifically written down in the trial. We're going to have a look at the ring after the break. This is a bit of the archaeologist bit. We know that in the trial, she told the judge that it was actually given to her by her mum and dad. So we know it. Right, if there's no more questions, let's take a break. Thank you very much. There you go. Right. Let's get on with it now. Talking about right. So what we have, we've got one relic associated with Joan of Arc. There we go. Bring it in. There she is. Now, this is in fact inaccurate because she's actually wearing a head guard. She's actually wearing a helmet. In life, she's said to have never worn any armour like this. And then what we then do have is we have a load of images of Joan of Arc, which I'm just going to chuck in there. So this is really interesting. This is obviously past few years. On her chest armour, she actually had the words Jesus Maria. Jesus Maria. And guess what's on her ring? Jesus of Maria. So there you go. There she is. She's wearing this crown. And if we bring in different portrayals in a modern sense, and there she is, holding her banner as she goes into battle. And more images of her, lots of these in the modern context. There you go. There she is on her armed horse. And what we'll do, we'll enlarge some of these images. And there she is. Can I get that up there? No, it's not letting me do any bigger. There she is with long red flowing hair. So she's portrayed in many different ways. What about an image closer towards the time? So many faces of Joan of Arc, Victorian illustration, and that's the bob. That's the bob haircut. Again with red hair, long red hair in this instance.
Yeah, but the pre-raffle ones had all these models with
There she was with black hair, with the armour, with a sword. Again, without the helmet, the key. We've seen that one. And there she is actually in the film, the 1999 portrayal. Blonde hair in that one. That's the image I was showing you. But obviously, I do believe she had darker hair in the film. So, and there she is, the Vision. I don't know why you've got Joan of Arc with a breast showing, but there you go, Saint Joan of Arc. Again, all these illustrations. There we go. A little bit more of a Renaissance look at what she looked like. And the one I'm actually looking for, where is it? Hang on. Right. One key thing is when we talk about her being burnt at the stake, she's not being burnt on ground level, right? Because it just wouldn't have consumed her body. I know a little bit about this. But if you're trying to burn a human body, the height of the pyre itself needs to be about 2 meters in height, with cross-lapping beams, really solid beams, right? They need to be cross-lapping. They need to stretch 1 meter wider than the body, right? So you've got this big platform. And lots of portrayals where they're on the stake actually show her on this huge platform, so that could actually consume her body in flames. Other descriptions show her on ground level, tied to a stake with a load of faggots around her, which are just going to burn her feet and legs. It's still alive. So you've got to put her into a pyre that's going to completely consume her body, except she had to be burnt on 2 other occasions because her body was not burnt properly. And there's probably a reason for that. It might be something to do with her weight.
When is it properly and she's dead? Did they have to get rid of all
The evidence,
pieces
yeah.
of her?
Yes. There is actually an illustration I'm trying to... Oh, yeah, there she is. This is the one I'm trying to look at. This is more Tudor Renaissance. There she is there. So obviously she's not showing any helmet or anything. And then this makes us jump on to the ring. So we're going to do the ring next. So here we go. Let's do the ring. Oh, you are so amazing this week, Lynn. It's working so well. There's the ring. Jesus and Mary, it says on there. And this is almost undoubtedly the ring that actually belonged to Joan of Arc. 99% provenance for it. 2016, Britain demands France return Joan of Arc's ring. It's quite ironic, really, isn't it? It's like, what's the parallel? Oh, you know, yeah. No. That's not the same parallel because the it's the French's ring. It's France's ring, and the English want it back when it's not even theirs. But the Elgin marbles are actually the Greeks in the first place. The 100 years war might not be quite over because there's a war brewing over this ring. And I've never heard of this war brewing over this ring. It was a gold-plated ring. And it was in a private collection, and it was put up for auction in 2016. And then basically they found out, after it got to France, they found out that they didn't give the export license for the ring. And it went for a staggering €376,000, which I've no idea how much that is in pounds. Probably something like £350,000 or something. Quite a large amount for a ring, but not a large amount for a ring from a famous person. This is the ring. This is the only relic, one of the only relics, because there are those seals that Joan of Arc was wearing. This is probably the only thing out there. So after it got to France, at a place in France known as Peu de Foy in France, it was unveiled and over 5,000 people come to see the ring. And a new twist to it. So the British government has sent out a lawyer to claim the ring back because the correct export license wasn't given. And the France are giving two fingers up in the air. One of them's got a ring on it. Yeah, exactly. But to the French, so it's saying, here we go. This is interesting. We are told that the National Arts Council considers this ring part of those objects with, and I quote, high national symbolic value, and as such should have part of a special legislation. So in other words, it's part of our heritage.
Well, it is. We burnt her.
You can't get it right. I'm sorry, you can't get this one right. So there you go. It's well worn, but it was gold plated. And I'm sure lots of replicas have been made of this. And it's probably, we know that this ring was given by her parents to her. And the French are now mocking the British, and the potential of a Brexit from the EU by telling the crowd, it is not at all our intention to have a P de Foy exit. In other words, giving the ring back. Ladies and gentlemen from Britain, if you want to see the ring, then come to Puy de Foy, because the French want to keep it, and it was tested in a laboratory in Oxford for its provenance. It's been kept in this lovely little box like that. The box itself is really cute, and it's got the writing on it, JHSMAR, which means Jesus and Maria, which was actually written on her breastplate as she went into battle. So that, and obviously, here we go. The description fits the ring she was wearing at the trial, and had been given to her by her parents. It has been slightly modified over time because it's been worn by various different people. And here we go. Lots of copies are in circulation. There was even a tombola in the 1900s in which prizes included versions of the ring. But this is the ring. This is the holy grail of rings, because there's been lots of sort of fake articles associated with Joan of Arc. So what I'd like to do next is I'd like to go on to a little bit more of the detail about Joan of Arc. Before we actually go on to that, I'd like to read out the following little thing from a university in Britain. Here we go. So what they're at this minute doing is they're examining that small follicle of hair for DNA to try and understand what type of illnesses Joan of Arc suffered from. So that's the archaeological work that's being done at this present point in time. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a map behind me, and then we're going to look at the death of Joan of Arc. Have everybody got 8 minutes, guys? Girls? Yeah. You haven't got to leave with your new purse then, Jane?
No.
Okay, good.
No, I've got everything I need in that little bag.
I'm glad. Jane, we do appreciate your wit. So what we're going to do, we're going to go straight on to the trial. So forget about everything else. Forget about the military campaigns. We've done that. We've done the capture, the trial. So this is another version of the trial. So it's more or less close in what I've read out in different forms. The trial for heresy was politically motivated, as we know. The tribunal was composed entirely of pro-English and Burgundian clerics, and overseen by English commanders, including the Duke of Bedford and the Earl of Warwick. So this is an English trial. This is a trial meant by the English crown to be rid of the bitch. Apply to get rid of a bizarre prisoner of war with maximum embarrassment to their enemies. Burning this witch at the stake would enter back some English pride in the witch that's been against us in battle. Under ecclesiastical law, every single ecclesiastical law was broken in this trial. The Pope was horrified. A certain Bishop Cachan, who was a British paid French bishop, who was at the trial, was meant to be unbiased, but he certainly was. The low standard of evidence used in the trial violated even inquisitorial rules. You hear about those inquisitors going across Europe, right? Everything was against even their own rules. Even people who claimed to go in testimony against Joan, the evidence given had no adverse effect. Nobody really wanted to lie. It was almost as if she had a halo above her. Without such evidence, the court lacked grounds to initiate a full trial. Instead, the trial went ahead anyway. So it's basically like accusing somebody of something, and it's been proven that they're innocent, but somebody still thinks that they're guilty, so the trial goes ahead. The court also violated ecclesiastical law. She had no legal advisor. So I'm reading this earlier on in the week, and I'm reading and thinking, this actually sounds quite fair if it was done fairly, but completely unfair if it's done unfairly. And it was done completely unfairly. In addition, stacking the tribunal entirely with pro-English clergy violated the medieval church requirement for heresy trials. It had to be balanced. So technically, they had to invite French clerics into it, and Burgundian clerics. It was just mainly pro-English clerics. Upon the opening of the first public examination, Joan complained that those present were all partisans against her, and that there was nobody in the trial from the French side. There was no one there. It was all, and everything was denied. Every single request she made, it was denied. And even, one of those extreme inquisitors was brought into the trial. A guy by the name of Jean Lemaitre. From the outset of the trial, even he objected. He said, hang on a minute, if we're really going to get this done, this is all completely wrong. And basically, he was one of the inquisitors there, and basically, if he didn't toe the line, he was to be executed as well. So nobody could win in this. Some of the other clerics at the trial, their lives were also threatened. Even the pro-English clergy were also threatened because they weren't against Joan of Arc. This violated all secular and ecclesiastical law. The trial record contains statements from Joan that the eyewitnesses later said. The trial record contains statements from Joan that the eyewitnesses later said astonished the court, since she was an illiterate peasant and yet was able to evade the theological pitfalls the tribunal had set up to entrap her. So in other words, she was very intelligent to avoid the traps. So instead of her saying, "Are you a witch?" she said, "No, I'm not a witch." Have you spoken to God in this way? She said, "No, I've spoken to God in another way." She knew all the ways out of this. So even though she was really illiterate, she was highly intelligent woman. The transcripts of the famous exchanges between Joan of Arc and the tribunal were also doctored. Even her signature was faked. She knew exactly what to say and how to say it. If I am not, may God put me there, and if I am, may God so keep me. I should be the saddest creature in the world if I knew I were not his grace. So whatever that means, these types of things were written into the court writings. Church doctrine and jurisdiction was away from her. If she had answered, if she was answering questions in a diplomatic way always, they couldn't catch her. So the 70 accusations made against her were then, as I said, whittled down to 12. Lots of the people who went to testify against her, in the transcripts, what they had originally said were falsified. Under inquisitorial guidelines, Joan should have been confined for the rest of her life, whatever she had done, because she was now meant to have been classed as aristocracy. But in this undertaking, she was due to be found to be somebody of lowly background. Finally, the 12 accusations which summarise the court's findings contradicted even the court's records. The judges doctored what those 12 accusations were, and none of them stuck. None of them actually stood. Cross-dressing charge. Cross-dressing was also classed as heresy. It was a capital crime for a repeat offence. So if you were found to dress twice as a woman, a man, and you were a woman, it was to be seen as a capital offence. But in her case, it was not meant to be. Joan agreed to wear feminine clothing throughout the case. However, as I've just so described, she wore the military clothing to protect herself from rape, but she was never going to be raped. She was evidently afraid to wear women's clothing because of this. And when she went into court the last time, she was wearing men's attire as well. So in that, she was to be found to be in breach of heresy laws, and it was now a capital offence. Lots of things to be said about this case. Is unfair. And on the final day of the court case, she was to be commuted to a life sentence. However, the documents didn't say that. So when she signed the document, she agreed to herself being burnt at the stake. So this was all completely unfair because she was illiterate. She couldn't read the documents. Eyewitnesses described this scene of the execution by burning on the 30th of May, 1431. She was tied to a tall pillar at Rouen. She asked two of the clergy, a Father Ledeveux and a Father Pierre, to hold a crucifix before her, which she embraced and she kissed. The English soldiers felt sorry for her. They made a small cross and they gave it to her, which she held by her chest, held on by a belt, whilst she was tied to the cross. After she died, the English soldiers were instructed to rake the coals and the charred timbers to expose the charred body, so that no one could claim she had escaped alive. What was left was burnt once and burnt twice. to reduce it to ashes and prevent any collection of relics, even stones, Ellen, and cast her remains into the Seine River. The executioner, a Thurarch, later stated that he greatly feared to be damned, for he had burnt a holy woman. And this is the executioner that burnt her at the stake. 22 years later, she was found to be cleared of all charges, and she was made a saint. And she's become a hero of the French people ever since. Are there any questions? I knew there'd be one from you, Jim. Keep us at one, Jim. Go on.
Well, you mentioned that they wanted to remove all remains of her, any record of her, right?
Yeah.
You say there's a ring found, her ring.
That was probably taken off her before she was burnt, because you can't burn metal.
No.
It's the modern cremations today. All the yeah. I've been told that they're now taking gold fillings out. Anyway, well, I've heard that as a rumor. Are there any questions?
Well, you haven't shown us the seals that are...
Yes, with her hair. Is it hair or a follicle or both?
Yeah. Hang on a minute. That should be here. I think what it is that something to do with Lynn. No, seal. Lynn, is it going to be on you? Is it going to be on you? Yeah, come on, Lynn. Right. Okay. Apparently, right. I haven't actually got the wax. I've actually got the wax seal, but I've actually got the seal itself. There it is. Bingo. And that's a reproduction, which is a bit more clearer. So if we bring that over, I can't show the wax one. No, not that. That's wrong. Hang on, that's not the right one. That's the one there. There, bingo. So this is actually that's the actual seal itself there. Okay. So that would have.
What's her name on there now?
Joan of Arc, 1431. So I'm actually thinking, if that's going to be the seal, that's going to be the positive version, or then again it could be the other way around. I'm not sure, but that's classed as the seal itself. I haven't actually got the wax seal that she embedded this seal into to show, but we've gone halfway. Are there any questions? Have you all enjoyed that today?
Yes.
Has it been of use? Now what we're going to do is quickly tell you what we're doing next week. Jim, don't forget, you've got to stay with me afterwards, darling. We've got to have some time together. Next week, we are doing, well, I think I'll skip Odyssey Iceman, you don't know anything about him. We're doing Odyssey the Iceman next week, and then the following week we'll be doing Boudicca. Anyone ever heard of her?
Yeah.
Boudica? Yeah, we'll do her the following week. So basically, Odyssey the Iceman, and we'll also cover the little bit of sinew that was found at the base of a quiver. The Odyssey the Iceman. That's what we're doing next week. So, any questions? No? That's good. Thank you very much, and I will see you all next week. Right, Dennis, what I'm trying to do is move your bag a minute, right? So we can get past. Put your bag under there. Got it? No, I want James to go past. Thank you very much.